I want to start perhaps first showing you this copy of our Humboldt-University's student magazine, Unaufgefordert, unrequested, so to speak. And in their recent issue, they had a quite well-informed, well-researched article, I think, about the recent boycott against the publisher Elsevier. I don't know if you've heard about it, but this major publishing house with its aggressive pricing policy got some severe and some almost aggressive boycott and protests from meanwhile I think up to 11,000 scholars who subscribed to the petition. So Peter Schirmacher, when you mentioned this changing roads, is there now a clash between the established publishers and the open access movement, or do they complement each other? How do you see that relation?
When I speak about the publishing process and when I speak about the role of publishing houses, so my personal opinion is publishing houses are very important for the scholarly process all in all. But there's a big difference between publishing houses, and so we will have different members of the publishing houses. And you mentioned Elsevier, and Elsevier is one of the monopole publishing house, and that's why there's a difference to very small publishing houses. From the point of the Humboldt University, we discuss a little bit more intensive to De Gruyter, also a big publishing house, and they are working in a special open access policy. And if you are looking to Emerald, my colleague Michael Siedel is an editor for an Emerald journal, and also there is an open access policy. So we have to wait, and the activities of the last months and weeks from the different universities, and I wish that my university would be organize an additional activity. So I believe Elsevier will change the policy also, I think so.
Do you want to react?
Is it on?
I think it should be on now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for inviting me. I would like to go back to this sort of open access movement that we have heard about. You talked about Berlin Declaration, and it all started from the researchers. They were the important people who actually started and they do the research and they publish, and they want to have their research as visible as possible. And now we see this kind of conflict with the Elsevier. I mean, Elsevier has in the open access movement, I think Elsevier has always been the big bad guy, and they are the visible sort of the icon of the commercial publisher, and that's why I think Elsevier has sort of been also in this boycott, the point of access. So the researcher is the key person in open access publishing, I think, and the researcher has the possibility to publish in whatever journal he wants to, at least in an idealistic world. We know that universities today they stress their researchers to publish in high impact factor journals, and because of funding purposes and the status of the university. But the initial thing is that the researcher has the choice where he wants to publish, and being a researcher, you can get a lot of visibility in having an open access publication where everybody can read it, and of course open access publications they have high sort of downloads if you look at statistics. So this battle going on between a commercial publisher and the researchers, I see it as something which is inherent in open access movement. And we can discuss, of course, that, but we can also discuss who is actually the publisher today. I mean, is it the individual researcher who can publish his articles in any forum, or is it driven by the commercial publisher? And we have a lot of small. No, I won't give over to you. Maybe.
Yeah. You made a few points, and I don't. And that's something I want to continue discussing. Is it true that, I mean, is it really only quantity that counts? Is it for a young scientist, for a young researcher, is it important how many people read my work, or is it important who reads my work? And that's something I want to discuss with you, and of course you too. What's the role of quality and prestige and image in this open access discussion? How can we make it happen that that open access journals or other publications get the prestige a publishing house with 150-year-long history has, without waiting for 150 years? Would you like to continue on that topic of?
No, I can say something. I think if we actually think about the publication, we have the peer review.
I think your micro is not on.
Or you have to take closer to your mouth.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think the publication as such, if you write a scientific article and it goes through peer review, and that's the quality stamp actually in all academic research. So whether this publication is published in a publishing house like Elsevier, or if it's published in an open access journal with high reputation, or that people trust, I mean, it shouldn't be any difference.
But it is, kind of, isn't it?
Yeah, but what's the reason for the difference? Yeah. That's something I cannot answer it, but maybe somebody else can.
First of all, thank you for inviting, and congratulations. It's a fantastic journal. I hope we can return to your journal. I think it's very interesting to hear about it. But to your question, I think it's not possible to start up a journal and get the 150 years of reputation behind you. But you can do other things, of course. And you have to remember that Elsevier, they run around, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 journals, of which many are not of a very high standard, but some are of the highest standard. So it's very much about what journals, and the journal is made up of an editorial board, and if you put the right people into that editorial board, people who have the right position or the right impact in the scientific community, you can start up a journal with an interesting an interesting setup for you as a young researcher to publish in. So also you have smaller publishers, university publishers with an interesting profile that might suit your field of research. So there are different ways of approaching it, I think.
That would be okay, Michael C. is Professor for Information and Library Studies here at our university, and so welcome. Nice that you made it. And
thank you.
Obviously, there was some miscommunication. But yeah, Sasha, you want to get
Excuse me. I already mentioned that is Michael, and the editor of Library High Tech. I mentioned it already when I speak.
All I wanted to say is to add to his comment about reputation, and maybe without being theoretical about it, you could explain to us what happened to the reputation of your journal when you went open access.
Okay. In the historical part of our event, I already mentioned that there were certain doubts as to if we could keep up this the standard and the reputation we thought we had at least, and but actually we never really quite knew where we stood. So in a way, you could say that going open access first made us aware of how much visibility we have and who really reads us and who is interested in us. And so our doubts were quickly cited, and the decision, of course, was ours to maintain the same standards as we had before. So in that way, simply, you could say it was just changing the form of publication. I think, of course, it was more than that, but that was a means for us to explain that to ourselves, learning the new way.
Okay.
Can I just add one little point, because I think you touched upon something very important from the Berlin Declaration regarding copyrights, that you don't give away your copyright by introducing another type of license like Creative Commons. You don't give up peer review because you go open access. Really, you don't do all these bad things, and I think that there's, in the discussion, there has been a tendency to focus on wrong things, so that open access equals non-peer review or non-reliability, and this is not true. So I think about reputation, it's really important to stress that you can keep up the quality level of the journal from a content point of view. And I think Johannes' point was very right when he said it's all about the articles, it's about the content at the end of the day. So you have to keep that level high, and then open access really is much about ideology and distribution, which is, I think, very crucial.
As Peter said, I'm editor of Library High Tech, which is a commercial journal, but the publisher Emerald is very open access friendly. This means that everyone who writes for the journal or any of the Emerald journals has the right, without asking, to load their materials into open access repositories, has the right to publish it elsewhere. Emerald does ask to get the copyright and then gives a whole series of rights back. This is not perhaps really the ideal method, but they argue that it's actually easier for giving permissions if there is a central place, which I know from trying to get permissions is true. One other thing I wanted to say in terms of reputation, you probably don't know what the iSchool group is. It is the 25 best institutes of library and information science worldwide by grant income and reputation. Admittedly somewhat self-defined, but there are metrics. And the decision that the group took just this last month was to make the proceedings of their conferences, this is now going on the 7th conference, open access. There had been an argument that publishing within the ACM was a higher quality standard, and we as an institution, as a group of 25 deans, said no, open access is a higher standard.
Peter Schumacher, you mentioned trusted repositories, the role, so where do I place my open access publication, and could you perhaps explain some of the thoughts and experiences you have with that? I mean, long-time preservation and the migratory processes we need. Johannes Freund, in his comment before the break, said, well, how will my articles be readable in 20 years' time? So you deal with these topics rather often, I guess.
Yes, I already mentioned I work from the Computing Center, and we started all our activities in electronic publishing in 1997, and we tried to publish the thesis and dissertation of the Humboldt-Univesität electronically. And what we need was a decision by the Academic Senate of our university that it is allowed to publish it electronically. And when we were the first time in the Academic Senate, our decision was cancelled from the computer specialist, because they said, we know how I can manipulate a thesis, how can I manipulate the real author, and so on. And that was one point, one requirement at the very beginning of every activities in the field of electronic publishing, and that's why it was our intention to do a lot of work in this field. There's a German initiative for networked information, and they have some different working groups, and one of the working groups is a working group for electronic publishing. And this working group published the so-called DINI certificate, the German Initiative for Networked Information certificate for document and publication server. And we have there 8 different criteria what is necessary for a trusted repository. And one point of a trusted repository is to ensure the long-term preservation. The long-term preservation of every document. So if you are thinking about the long-term preservation of an electronic publication, so you think at first about the stability of a server. Yes, of course you need a trusted server. You need a trusted computing center, you need backups and so on. But it is, in most cases, it is relatively easy. But it is a little bit more complicated to ensure the integrity of a document. How it is possible to change a document, which kind of possibilities exist to ensure it. And one of the criteria is to use a so-called hash word. That means a special algorithm which you can use and which you can use today when you will store this document, and you can use it 10 or 20 years later, and if the hash word is the same. So you will say, okay, there is no different in the former text and in this text. It is already mentioned the so-called XML, Extensible Markup Language, as one possibility which is in standard. Not PDF in the past was in standard, XML is in standard. You can read it machinable, and you can read it, the human can read it. So that's why it is a good chance to have to use a standard, and you can read it also 10, 20 or 15 years later. And there are some additional technical possibilities which are necessary to build up a real trusted repository. And that is only one point of it.
I have a question to you, actually. I would like to ask you, you talk about now trusted repositories, and they should be in universities, institutions. What do you see the role of the national libraries, or maybe you as an information science professor can answer? I mean, formerly national libraries took care of long-term preservation in the era where we had printed, and I understand that actually they collect also now open access publications.
Funny you should ask this question. Peter and I have a project with the German National Library where we are looking at long-term digital preservation issues. And certainly the integrity of an object, the authenticity of an object is part of that. A lot of people argue in Germany and in other countries that national libraries should take on this role. I think that's a serious mistake. I think it's a serious mistake for 2 reasons. One is that the national libraries actually really rarely have the technological expertise to do this. They have some people with a level of expertise, but the kinds of complicated issues, I mean, Peter was just touching on some of the issues that we have to deal with in terms of making the repository trusted, in terms of making sure that we really know what the integrity of an object is. These are research issues. Making sure that systems are secure, not going to be hacked by someone. These are real research issues, and there needs to be a cooperation between national libraries, other kinds of institutions, universities, and indeed, I believe, commercial enterprises. And you know perhaps that IBM is very much involved with the Copal project at the DFB. The other thing that I think is important for us to realize is when we're talking about long-term archiving, putting trust in any one institution is a risk, especially with digital materials, especially, as Peter was saying, they are so malleable, they are so easily changed. And we don't have good metrics for how we measure change other than to do a hash value, a checksum that says this is genuine or this isn't. It tends to be binary. These are things we're certainly working on, but to trust a single institution to make those decisions and to hold all of that, I think, actually doesn't work well. There's no guarantee the National Library has enough money anyway.
Yeah, that's an important point. There are so many roles and involved into this open access discussion, and there are other new roles too. So, what would you say? Is it a different kind of? It is obviously a different kind of working in the field of open access publishing than in the traditional way. The old roles of publisher, editor, and writing scientists are not clearly separable anymore. So, do we need to think completely new, or can we take this the structure we have and build on to it, or do we need to define everything new in this kind of open access debate?
I think the answer he just gave shows that in a lot of cases we simply try to use what we already have. We have a central library, so we go there and ask them if they could do that, and we do not question if we simply change that and build something completely new. So I would say in way too many cases we simply build onto what we already have, while we should question if that is still the right way to go.
So what's your opinion on it? Should we go in?
Well, my opinion is that in a lot of cases we should go somewhere else and look for other options and ask ourselves if a central library is really the one place we should store everything, and what if someone who has bad intention has a single switch to shut off our knowledge at some point, if that is how we would like to proceed.
One comment about whom we should trust or not. In Finland, we have had a rather strong debate on open data, which would be the research data, and who should take care of restoring that for the purposes of being used by other researchers later on. And in many cases, the first impression was that libraries should take care of it, but that is still more problem, as I understand it, in really preservation of research data, and even how to make the indexing of research data and put it in a format that you really can use it by using other researchers and all these sorts of things. So in at least discussion now in Finland has been that maybe not the library should do that, but some other institution, or we have to have a new solution. So maybe when we get more sort of research data has not traditionally been a library business, I think. I mean, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but
I will.
so I think that's a new form of publishing, and maybe that brings out new forms also for open access and journal publishing.
This is something that my students often say, that libraries have never dealt with research data before and they find it very alarming to deal with. Actually, libraries have collected research data for ages, but it's often been in print form. For example, one of my favorite examples is the census. It is traditionally kept in a library. It is data. It was reduced to dead tree objects, sometimes called paper, because it was the only way that people had for carrying the information forward. And the census of India, for example, I forget, it was something like 26 volumes each decennial period. Processing that was very difficult, but it was in the library. If you are in the natural sciences, you probably use things like the CRC Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, or use in chemistry Beilstein. Those are all sources of data which simply were reduced into paper. So libraries have a tradition of this. What libraries don't have a tradition of as yet, and I think Peter and I are trying to change this, is dealing with large amounts of digital information and handling digital data, especially digital research data. Universities do have experience with this. The Institute for Social and Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan has been operating on research data since the 1960s. I think it was 62 or 63. And the comparable organization to what Peter has here in Germany, DINI, the Coalition for Networked Information in the United States, these people are regularly talking about how we, in institutions that produce research data, need to store it, where we store it, and what the various pieces of those institutions are. I will not give a complete speech here, but I will just close in saying that I think the very close relationship between computer centers and libraries is absolutely critical, and is going to be much more critical as time goes on. This is one of the weaknesses with national libraries, is that they don't really have that other piece as we do within universities. And I think the collaboration that Peter has with our university library is one of the best models I have seen in the world.
Niels, I would like to ask you one reason also why we invited Nordic experts as the Nordeuropaforum. We want to know a bit about the strategies and developments also in this region we deal with. So are there any government strategies? Does the Nordic Council of Ministers have any strategy for open access? Is that a very important topic in your discussion? What's the picture?
Well, I'd like to answer that question, but I thought you actually asked another question about the role between publisher and editors and authors before, and we turned it somewhere else. But I just want to answer that, because I think it doesn't necessarily have to change the relationship, because it depends on what you want. If you want a normal journal, it's just a matter of publishing it in another way. I've been in a publishing house. We published a lot of journals, and some of them wanted to go digital. Fine, we went digital. Some wanted to go open access, and then we found other ways of doing that. But that doesn't mean that you can't do other things where you really change the whole formula of a journal and turn it into something different. I think there are so many options, and I think you in your presentations touched upon these options like wikis or rolling journals. So there are many different new ways of publishing journals, but I think the relationship doesn't have to change because of going open access. But as to the Nordic countries, I was very pleased to hear that, which I didn't know. I've only been there for a bit more than a year, that the Nordic Council of Ministers actually were so foreseen as to support this fantastic journal way back. I don't know when it ended, but at least...
Too long ago.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. But I think on a practical level, I mean, being an intergovernmental organization, we have an obligation to publish open access, and we have made a so-called gratis open access. I mean, we've put our PDFs on the web, all what we publish since 2004, and the Nordic Council of Ministers is made up of a secretariat which is in Copenhagen, where we do a lot of publishing, but we have a lot of institutions and organizations that we fund. So it turns out to be a very big network, and there's no policy for publishing and for what we fund, which is being published in that network. And that's something I've been looking at and proposed to the Director General that we should we should formulate a policy, which we will be doing. So that will, I think, focus on what's really open access, because it's not just about giving away PDFs for free, it's also about the way that we give them away for free, introducing a new license and trying to actually profile our ideas on open access. So that we can do, and we will need to build another type of publication database based on open source, where we can integrate all these different stakeholders and institutions which are in the network. If we can bring that up to a political level, will be the next and more perhaps interesting question, because presently I know a couple of years ago the Swedish Research Council introduced an open access mandate really for what they fund, and they were the first to do so in the Nordic countries. And in Denmark there was an ambition of doing something similar in 2007, but it hasn't come about yet, so we still wait. It was very close. There was a big report made for the minister, the Danish minister, former government, and it was not really executed. So now there's a new Minister for Research, and he's not really taken it up yet. So we haven't made any concrete actions for doing a common Nordic policy, but that would be my really ambition to, if we could start that motion, because we have had one project which was actually a library project called NordBib, which ended in 2009 and then was kept alive until next week, where there's a conference in Copenhagen, and then it's dead. So the end of that, but that doesn't mean that we could start somewhere else. There's a lot of, it has generated a lot of important network among libraries and universities and publishers in the Nordic countries. In fact, in Iceland, they would never have gone thinking about open access, so they say themselves, if it had not been for this project. So we should build upon that momentum, really, but we have to lift it up. But it might take some while, but it's my personal ambition, but I'm just part of a greater game here. But to begin with, we will, I think, start being very concrete and do it ourselves. That'll be a rather big project anyway, because the 40 organizations need to act together, and then we'll hopefully have 1,000+ publications per year, but we'll see how we manage.
Lashna, you work at the Institute for Internet and Society, which is, of course, a very interesting topic today. Now, what role does the internet play? And I would like to ask you, thinking about open access, do you think that these publications are visible enough? Does society actually know about them? Are there anything which helps also to create a link between the ivory tower and the public?
First of all, thank you for that question. And secondly, I think that open access publications are way more visible than many researchers think they are. And once someone published open accessly, they see how many people read their publication and how often they get emails and questions about the publication. And oftentimes they're stunned by that. And it's a tough thing to ask if open access is one way to connect society or the rest of the society with those in the ivory tower. I think that's kind of a step that is a little bit too big to simply do that with open access. But I think it's at least it points into the right direction, because anyone who's interested in a certain topic has now the possibility to read it. That doesn't mean that more people are interested in the topic automatically, but at least they might be able to access it if needed. Before that, they simply weren't able to.
to it?
I agree with you, and I think also that we also can see many business models coming up from this type of openness, so that because we know now that many companies, they don't have access to all these research data that and research articles that we in the university have. So there might be in certain areas there might be an interest also for commercializing things, and maybe we get a bigger visibility and benefit to society that way also.
In terms of access, in terms of discovery, I just wanted to mention a paper recently published in Library High Tech about how effectively, or in fact, how many problems there are with Google getting information about content in repositories. It used to be that Google made a very focused effort to do this, especially for Google Scholar, and the effectiveness has been less in recent times. This means, since so many people start with Google or Google Scholar in terms of discovery, that our visibility, especially with green road materials, has in some sense dropped. And it's a sign, one of the things that commercial publishers do that we often forget to do in open access is the marketing piece. And marketing is actually very important. In terms of Nordic cooperation, I just wanted to say that we in Berlin have a very close cooperation with the Royal School of Library and Information Science in Copenhagen and with Tampere in Finland. We also have a cooperation with colleagues in Norway and somewhat less active cooperation with Bosch in Sweden. We have, as one of our goals within this high school group, to continue to build on this. It's not Nordic exactly, but sometimes I've called it the Hansa cooperation. A group of northern institutions that are committed, among other things, to open access and are committed to some of the same research goals.
Just what, because I'm happy to hear that, first of all. And secondly, I wanted to say that I'm part of an international governmental network with United Nations leading and OECD and the World Bank and IMF being part of that network too. And as you may know, the World Bank came up with an open access policy in April. And it's very interesting to be part of that international discussion because we should not forget that there's a whole world out there where all these things are being discussed. And there's, for instance, been a working group led by the WHO and OECD, UNESCO on Creative Commons for international governmental organizations. So this is very important that there are collaborations on many levels and in the Nordic, within the Nordic countries, but also looking outside.
Yeah, I mean the discussion.
Oh, I didn't realize you were before.
The batteries are running low, obviously, on these.
The discussion on open access, it is a global one, and we invited Juliet from Helsinki and Niels from Copenhagen to get another point of view, another perspective into this more German located one. Would you say, I mean, the foundation to build up an open access society must be global. What would you say are the things you need in case of law and politics to create a solid foundation for this development? Would you like to answer on that, Niels?
If you take it, yeah. if you by foundation mean, or what exactly do you mean by foundation? I just need to be...
Well, I mean, for example, the law, and we talked about copyright, or Peter Schumacher mentioned it in his opening statement. That's something that is different from country to country, but
barbaric everyone.
Yeah. And I want to stress out that there's a difference between copyright and the right of using things. You know, in German it's Nutzungsrecht and Urheberrecht, so one has to make a difference between these two things. But how do we make it to build a foundation where everybody can trust in and build on and rely on, and in a loyal kind of way?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, the Creative Commons license is already there. It's it gives you, I mean, the attribution license gives you a solid ground to stand upon. I mean, we in our way of, when we commission a work and publish that work, we take all the rights in order to give them back. But we need to take the rights in order to be able to give them back, because we have the copyright. And that's, I mean, touching upon the Berlin Declaration, we can give them back then using a Creative Commons, and then choosing whichever way is the best. The reason why I mentioned this international working group on Creative Commons is that being an international organization, you're not dealing with a national law, so you need to find out how do you deal with the law. So this has been settled with Creative Commons, the Creative Commons group, and then it's fairly easy to just go ahead. I mean, of course there are a lot of issues regarding copyright, which I'm trying to be very clear about with whoever I speak with in our network, because there's a tendency to use whatever you find on the internet in your publications, and this creates a lot of problems. So we have to be aware that people are aware about clearing rights, and so that's a crucial thing. But we have fairly easy ways to go around with that, because we need to clear our back by saying you have to fill in this form and sign it in order to let us know that all rights are clear. Be it illustrations or graphs or tables or quotes or whatever it is, all these different things. So I don't know if it answers your question, but Creative Commons would be that foundation upon which we build.
Would you like to add something too?
Well, I would like to add to this that you also need to have some sort of funding of a journal. I mean, you can a journal is normally, of course, started by enthusiasts in a research area, and you can probably have a journal going on for a couple of years or hopefully more, but at some point you need to also have the funding cleared out. And at least in Finland we have a little bit different situation than in the other Nordic countries. We have a lot of small learned societies. I'm chairing one in information science, and we also publish a journal, and the funding for publishing the journal Open Access is coming from public funding. The Ministry of Education and Culture, they finance small learned society journals in local languages, and a bit like your journal here in this. And having this type of funding is very important for open access journals. I don't think a journal can be successful in the long run if you don't have sort of a stable financing ground, some kind of model that you can rely on. So.
Thank you for doing that transition to the topic. Wonderful, because that was one thing we were very interested in. What do the others think about possible models of funding open access? Do we need sponsoring models? Is public funding isn't always available? So what do we do? or are there already experiences that you can share?
And let's also think about the different roles. So we have the publisher, the author, and the story, the activity, and the middle. I mean, there are a lot of people. It's just take every perspective.
From my point of view, it is the most difficult question to find the right business model for open access. If you are looking to Nordeuropaforum, so there's the enthusiastic people, the redactors and all this, and you have a computer and media server where electronic publishing is one of the research topic. And that's why we were interested in to change to the electronic form of this journal. And all in all, nowadays we have 8 different journals on our server, but nobody will pay for it. So we have some difficulties, and one of my tasks is to find the next project funded by the DFG in order to have enough people that these people can support such activities. In most cases, in every project we try to find some new experiments with a journal. We already spoken in the break here. One of the ideas could be that a publication is not necessary that it is a text-oriented publication nowadays. And you have the media, you can use video or audio files as a kind of publication. So from the point of a computer center and from the point of the professorship, I'm interested in these new models, but that is not the real business model for that. We're discussing in the Humboldt-University for about 2 years, and we are not at the end. What could be the right way? And one of the ways is to create an own publishing house for the Humboldt-University. Another way is to create such a publishing house together with a organized scientific publishing house, which already exists. And the third way is to create a so-called publishing office. Publishing office in order to support the different activities in the different scientific fields in my university here. And next year, I believe in a week, we will hear the results of the so-called excellence competition. And if this university is successful, so we will have a decision in this field too. I hope so.
No, I think he wanted to add something.
Okay. It's very obviously always the tricky question about the money. There's a clever Norwegian economist who's working at the university and very open access engaged, who at some point said, "Do what you are best at." That makes sense in economic terms, meaning that publishers should do what they're best at, researchers should do what they're best at, and so on. Libraries too. And one thing I have noticed from my previous position at a university press, where we had a portfolio of journals, and we experimented a lot with these going first online and then open access, is that a classical sort of evolution of a journal is that you start it up with the publisher, you learn a lot of things, you build it up, you brand it, you make it live, then you learn more, then you get more self-confident that you can run it yourself, and at the end of the day you say, now we go our own path. And then you end up on your own, and now you open access, and then somebody is taking care of some part of infrastructure for you, like a library or a university server, and then they start thinking, how should we run this on a financial viable basis? And then they start thinking, maybe we should turn into a publishing house. So you're back at the beginning. And for many years we said to these to the libraries, because a lot of libraries in the Nordic countries at least, and also in Germany I know, thought, well, we should be publishers too. And then this we can do, and then they said, okay, we have to think about marketing as well. And then we have to think about, and at the end of the day it was the same sort of setup as a typical university publisher. So I'm completely agree that marketing, we should talk more about how to push things. I think this is crucial. But it's when you look at the financial model or the business model, I think we need to use what's already there and not reinvent those things. That being said, I think it's also important when you look at the individual journal that you'll never find one size that fits all in this, because you'll have different situations in different research areas. In some, I know some business school journals in Denmark, they have an annual conference, and for that they take a fee which is somewhat higher than what they need, because that then finances their journal, and then it can be open access. You could have donations from your. I mean, you have to be perhaps a bit progressive to do that, but also we have tried, using Google AdSense. That doesn't really work. It doesn't give enough money. Or people talked about, doing merchandise or sponsorship. It doesn't really work within the humanities and social sciences. Like classical philology, having ads for going to Greece on holiday, it doesn't really fit somehow, but it could maybe. But we did a lot of experimentation, and it normally ends up that public funding will, drive it, and that's not a viable way, because then you should be more creative than that, and it really depends on your field of research, if you can come up with something there, I think.
Michael Siebel wanted to add something?
I wanted to add something there, that the financing question is very complicated. There's a whole range of models that are being experimented with. PLOS1 has some models, there are Golden Road models. Making the author pay is not, in my opinion, a particularly satisfactory solution, though it does mean that materials are out there and available. It certainly reduces the author pool. And I think it's a good thing that there is a big range of experimentation at this point, because we don't have good solutions. I did want to say on the legal question that I do think we need to re-examine at the social level some of the assumptions we have behind copyright. The fundamental assumption with copyright is that a work is going to be of value to the author in a direct monetary sense, and in fact in the academic world the value is not in what we get back by way of royalties, but what we get by way of positions and grants. So it's a very different copyright structure, and if the law allowed people to indicate what kind of interest they had, that would go a long way to simplifying how our copyright regulations supported or in present fundamentally hindered open access. Hard sell.
Just another point on the business model, because on books and monographs, you mentioned historic or history as a subject, and 300 pages is a very thin monograph. Anyways, I was part of an EC-funded project called OAPEN, Open Access for Books in Europe, and we were 7 different university presses spread around Europe. This project went on from 2007 for 3 years, and it's still running actually, and it's a foundation, OAPEN Foundation in Den Haag, Netherlands. And the model there really is that that there should be a funding pool, so you can, as an author or as a publisher, apply for money to publish open access. And this has been tested actually already in Austria, where the Research Council do this kind of funding. So you apply for money for the monograph to be published, and then if you, on top of the normal traditional publishing, go open access, you can have more money to do so. So that model is slowly spreading in Great Britain. JISC has done a pilot introducing this model, and that could come into to the Nordic countries as well, I think. This is for books, and books normally are a different case because the monetary expectation sometimes is part of that, although at an increasing lower level because distribution of academic books is really declining, unfortunately.
All right, I think it's high time that we allow you to pose questions, open up here, and I can imagine there are some on the table. And who wants to start? Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. I always have a million questions. My background was, for example, also from Wikipedia, and that was a model that would never work. There would never be money for it. And some of the money came from many, many small, some larger amounts of money that were donated from people who had a use for it. So I've been asking myself, who consumes academics? Who uses academics? And it's the companies. Why is there no such idea that we have some sort of a small tax on academics, that the companies then pay the universities for the production of these academics that they use to produce their products and be successful in the marketplace? Why do they always let them outside? I think they're the ones that could perhaps be doing some payment.
Isn't that payment called tax?
But they don't pay taxes. They always find ways to not pay taxes.
That's a different question, yes.
But on the other hand, there are companies like Google who sponsor a whole department of the university. So I mean, that's kind of a way to get around taxes to pay to donate money directly. So, but you've got a point there. So.
Actually, there was an alternative model proposed by I've forgotten her name, but Bloomsbury academic Taylor Francis, I think she's called. She had an idea of how you could make a sort of global library consortium that would pool money into supporting open access. So that would generate a lot of money, and then you would get the open access back. I think it might be very hard to administer and to realize, to make it become real, but I'm pretty much for thinking alternative. I think that might be, your model might be hard to get through, but I think it's the way of thinking and sometimes trying to turn it around, that's very fruitful. And that's what this forum is for, I think. And because together we think better than on our own.
Judith?
Well, getting back to the initial thing with open access, it was to actually, because research is financed by public money, so the public also should have the right to do research results. So I think today we, at least in some areas or some disciplines, medicine for example, where research funders, they sort of demand open access at some point, and that has actually been a tremendous boost for open access journals, and they have high prices for article processing fees, for example, so that in British Medical Journal I think they have an article processing fee of 3,000 euros or something like that. I don't know exactly the figure now, but it's really high. So the funders sort of steer this thing in some disciplines, but I don't know.
More questions, comments, interventions?
I would like to know what universities do to encourage their students or their scientists to publish open access, because if you say there's a need for open access, you need the scientists to do open access. And I think that's the problem. You need a grassroots movement to get that. And when If they, and it grows stronger, the more you encourage them to do that. But so what do universities do that?
In a way, I'm probably not the one who should answer this, since Sandra is one of my students and she's undoubtedly heard my answers before. One of the real problems is we often actually discourage open access publication because we have journals, commercial journals often, where we say, you know, this is a first-class journal. If you publish in that, you will get a professorship, you will get a better professorship, you will get tenure, and we don't favor the open access journals in any explicit way. If there happens to be a good open access journal, we might say, okay, I guess we could count that. But that's not really taking an active approach. And with submitting articles too, we as professors have a choice where we're going to submit our articles. If we say, this commercial journal is obviously the best, so I've got to submit there, we keep feeding the best articles to that journal, and we're not going to be sending them to the open access ones. If we consciously say we are going to support open access publication by, I mean, assuming we are good researchers ourselves, by sending our best works there, we do support. I think we need seriously to think about that as a university.
Can I ask you a question then? Because it was raised as a question in Denmark during the discussion about, I don't know, is it working? It's okay? About bibliometrics, because we had a huge discussion and debate in Denmark about which model to introduce. And we ended up introducing the so-called Norwegian model, which you might know, more or less copying it, I would say. Although 700 researchers were involved in the process. Anyways, the thing was, should we have a relation between open access and bibliometric?
I do believe that we need metrics to be able to make some of the kinds of decisions we make. I was in a Berufungskommission, a committee to decide on a new professorship yesterday, and we were in fact talking about how we measure the quality of the 30+ applicants in terms of publication, how important they were. One of the things that I warn about is that the current bibliometric measures that we have are not reliable across disciplines. Some of them take a very short horizon for citations. Many of them exclude open access publications. And I have colleagues, I know of colleagues who, when they're asked about citations, actually go to Google Scholar, because Google Scholar will not only pick up the citations in commercial journals, it will pick up open access citations, ideally. This paper I mentioned is showing that that's less perfect than we hope. But to exclude this whole range of open access citations, and to say in a country, and the Nordic countries are not alone in trying to come up with some standards for the metrics, this is how we evaluate our faculty, again, undermines our open access stance.
Could I pose a question to you, actually? Because according to the Danish system, being an editor of a journal, you get nothing. I mean, in metrics terms, you get nothing. So that's, I think, not only for journals, but also for anthologies, where you have people putting a lot of time and effort into. In this time where you really need to focus on metrics, I think that's That's a problem. Have you experienced that?
It's a part of the academic self-exploitation system, so that you waste, you invest your time, of course, into these processes, and of course it's in a way idealistic. Yeah.
And what about metrics for the journal? Because I mean, you've been foreseen in any respect you could ever think. I have never seen or heard about a journal in the social sciences and humanities being so innovative over such a long period as your journal actually, which is a great compliment, I think. But have you also had luck with being indexed in ISI, Thomson, or?
No, that's exactly one of the problems that we are still fighting with. That we try to, and we work on that. And the communication. I don't know, if, Johannes, if you can say something about that, but it seems somewhat complicated. So we were a bit also puzzled about that.
We are indexed in ISI, and I can tell you the process is Byzantine. And it really says very little about the quality of a journal to be indexed there or not indexed there. It says much more about the politics of Thomson, in my view, and Debbie's.
So, yeah, one more question.
Just to answer that, I think the economics from the Zentralbibliothek für Wirtschaftswissenschaften in Kiel, they are in the ISI and they are in the journal system, so it took about 5 years or something like that to get that in the world, so maybe you can collect that.
Let's see.
Yeah, part of what's Byzantine, you've got 3 tries over a 6-year period, I think. The degree to which your editorial board is international is a factor. What that has to do with the citations and what that has to do with the quality. One could raise the question, but it appears to be a very significant factor. And what country you're in, what language you're producing. If you're producing an English language journal, you have vastly better chance of getting in than if you're producing a German journal, even if the German journal is better.
But another question is, does this influence what kind of articles you get in? Do you feel that it's getting harder to get good articles in your journal because you're not indexed?
I would say it became easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
But I don't know how many people really reflect upon the thought.
Well, they do.
Yeah.
Our experience is that people, also from Eastern Europe, are
okay, that's right.
Because they are becoming aware that they are in need of being indexed or
Yeah, so it's not an easy answer, but I know an Estonian authors, for example, they have long lists of journals which the government says, well, these are respected, and if you are quoting these or publishing these, that's okay, and we're not on that list. And he said, sorry, I won't submit a manuscript. But in general, I would say there are enough people writing articles of such a quality that we can't really complain. But it's an issue for us more than for the authors at the moment, at least. And of course, adding that as a attracting factor would help enormously.
I can say that when we received our ISI impact factor, the number of good articles did not go up, but the amount of garbage did.
Debbie, one?
Just one small thing. One of the advantages, I think, of Nordeuropaforum is that you have an ISSN number. And in Berlin, this is the best thing you can have so that your articles are accepted for funding from the government, is having an ISBN or an ISSN number. I know because I have other publications that I have online that have been finally stricken from the list from the Senate because they're not real publications, although they're the ones that are used by everyone. As long as you're able to have a number like this, our officials in Germany are very happy then.
Make up a number.
What's virtual then? What's real?
Yeah, that's the question. What is a real publication? What are journals? These are questions that have been addressed.
Okay, yeah.
So to sum it all up, I formulated some last questions regarding the future. So I would like to address every single one of you and ask, where do you see open access in, let's say, 5 to 15 years? Would you like to start, Michael?
Sure. Open access in 5 to 15 years. That's actually a surprisingly short time frame. It seems long perhaps when you're a student, but at my age it seems like a short time frame. And I am sorry to say that I don't actually see a whole lot of change in open access journals in that time. I think that one of the really critical issues is working out some of the financing issues. I think even more critical is for universities to decide that open access really is an important policy and needs to be carried through as a policy, not simply as an idea which they are happy to endorse but actually don't do anything to put backing to. And this is certainly a battle that Peter has been carrying through here at Humboldt to try to make people take open access seriously. It is a struggle that many of our colleagues in library in information science have been carrying forward. My hope is that in 15 years we will have open access publication, we will have open access submissions be considerably greater, considerably more standard, and that our universities will favor them. But it's more of a hope than an expectation.
Well, it's hard to look ahead, but I think at least we can say that the open access movement, or the initiative, will not go back. It will at least keep on the same pace as it has done so far, which is not really that fast. I mean, I was at the EC opening conference for the last framework program in 2007, which seems like yesterday in terms of what has happened in some senses. So I completely agree. It's not a very long time span. And if you look at the pace in which some of the big journal publishers work, I mean, you don't get that optimistic. I was looking at Wiley, who introduced their open access policy. And then when you look at what they have actually open access, it's less than 1%. So there's still a way to go. My hope is, of course, that we will. My hope is really that we will get more clear on what you stated initially. What is open access, and that it's really what the benefits for the researcher, and bring that back into focus rather than a big fight against between publishers, libraries, and so on. So we can get more focus on what it really is and the benefits. And then locally, the Nordic countries, my hope is to be able to influence the creation of a policy in the Nordic countries.
Of course, this is a difficult question. From my point of view, there are 2 points. At first, I will say that the technological process of electronic publishing will change more and more. That means, from my point of view, at the present situation, the aim of the electronic publishing activities is to be comparable with a traditional publication. At the current time, we are thinking about pages if we published in the web. That's not normal. Why we are thinking about pages if we are using the web? So I believe there will be a lot of next steps. I already mentioned that we, at the present situation, when we are speaking about a publication, it is a text-oriented publication. Nobody is thinking about a video, or nobody is thinking about a file, an audio file. In a lot of scientific disciplines, it is very important to have the research visible, and that's why it will change. Not in all scientific disciplines with the same speed, but it will change from my point of view. And if it will change, so we will have the necessity And every researcher will find everything in the net, and in most cases not on paper. And that's why it is necessary to do all the most of these things in open access. And that will be the requirements of the researchers in this field. And if I discussed with the former president of our university here, so he said, okay, since I use the net for my special research, I'm thinking about what can I personally do to do it for better conditions for open access. And I believe both things are very close to another.
Well, I agree with most of what you have already visualized about the future of open access, but I'm also taking the aspect of how the public, the reader, is reacting to a new technology. We have now a big sort of movement and change in using iPads, mobile solutions, and things like that. And this can actually influence also how we use literature and for example, articles. If we have them locked up very severely in repositories or in journals with big costs, and that you only can access through a university license, then it might be a hardship to really attract the reader in a mobile environment. So maybe this can be one. I'm trying to be a little bit now thinking in new ways of how we could see the future. So we will, obviously. It was interesting when you actually tried to ask how many people in the audience read articles online, and there were about 50-50 if I counted correctly. So how will we do it? Use these new devices in 10-15 years? It might be something. Well, you have it.
I have my very own. I also think that 5 to 15 years is not a lot of time to change a system that has been around for quite a while. And I wanted to point to the Berlin conference, which has been in '03, so that's already 9 years in the making, and we see how much has changed in the last 9 years. So there is change, but it's a very steady progress. What I also wanted to point to is that most professors, at least those I've met, like as a whole, they aren't born innovators. So rather than 5 years, I would probably say it needs a generation to really change the system as it is.
Well, yeah. As you notice, the batteries of these microphones are already running low, and we've spent quite a lot discussing here with you, and especially with you. Thank you all for taking your time for coming here, even the two of you coming here from Nordic countries, especially for this event. I think a lot of these questions still need further discussion. Perhaps you can drop in and take a look at the wiki. Perhaps you are interested in contributing to the discussion there, and let's see when we meet in, well, I don't know when, 5 to 15 years where we will be. And it was a very interesting discussion.
It's probably 15 years when you make your 30th anniversary.
Yes.
Indeed. See you then.